Very important to understand conflicts of interest if you have a role in government, where you may be awarding contracts, running a tendering process, awarding licences or running a funding program. The reason for this is that they can create significant risks for an agency where they're not properly managed. A conflict of interest may arise where a person has an interest, whether it's a personal or a financial interest, or a close member or of their family or a close associate of theirs has such an interest, that comes into conflict with the role that they have and the duty and responsibility that they have in their role. The other situation where conflicts can arise is where they have one role which comes into conflict with an existing role that they have and the duties that they have in that role. Some examples, I think, are the best way to understand what a conflict of interest, how it may look and how it may arise. Some of the examples would arise if you had a shareholding in a company, say that was bidding for a Commonwealth contract, or a close member of your family had such a shareholding. Equally, if you had a role, say, as a board member on an advisory board that was applying for funding from your government agency, that would potentially create a conflict of interest as well. And when we're talking about conflicts, we're talking about actual conflicts of interest, as well as potential conflicts and potentially perceived conflicts as well, where another person may perceive a conflict to exist, whether or not it does in fact actually give rise to a conflict.
And Jane, what are the main risks arising from conflicts of interest for government departments and also for staff who are running projects?
The important thing is that the risks are legal as well as commercial and reputational. So the legal risks for the individual are they may be in breach of their obligations either under the Public Service Act or a CAC Act for a CAC entity or an employment contract for a contractor. And they may be exposed to civil or potentially criminal liability for breaching those obligations. For the agency has a responsibility to manage the affairs of the agency in an ethical way, and that responsibility is actually based on the CEO of the agency and delegated down within the agency. So all decision makers carry that responsibility. There's a lot of scrutiny of the way that government projects are run and decisions are made. And any situation where a conflict of interest arises and isn't properly dealt with has a significant risk for the agency in adverse scrutiny and also the reputations of people involved.
And just finally, do you have any tips for dealing with conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest?
The key tip is to declare. So if you have a conflict of interest or if you believe you may have one, even if you're in a dilemma about whether it really is a conflict of interest, the important thing is to declare it. Once you declare it, then the risk is really transferred to your supervisor or your agency, who then need to manage the risk. At that point, the agency needs to work out what is a practical way of dealing with the conflict of interest in a way which will reduce risk for the agency. And often advice will be useful because they will find that they can work around it or work in a way to minimise any risk to the agency.
Well, some great tips there, Jane. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.